Hi. Okay, so hi there. Our presentation for the Invention and Innovation Project was to create a hidden shelf. The idea mostly came from our mutual experience with storage problems. So I'm currently living in a smaller apartment and I take advantage of pretty much any extra storage space I can get. Anyways, the statistics we found show that 38 to 42% of Americans actually rent self-storage units. And when it comes to things like TVs, quads, boats, or any bigger objects in general, in which the rental would make sense, they get it. But as for the rest of us, it can be a real struggle to find out what to do and where to find the space for all of their things. Trevor recollected his experiences where he went up to his attic to check his heater before winter to make sure everything was working properly for the colder weather that was like around the corner. And while he was up there, he was thinking about just how much space was available up there in juxtaposition to just like how much of a pain it was to climb up. That was the main origin for the idea's conception, and I could certainly relate to that as I've had my fair share of attic trips that were less than smooth sailing. That is to say that like we're united in our mutual struggle for space and convenience. We started researching to see if this concept already existed, and the first relevant results showed a space that fit 150 pounds and cost $3,300, which was also just for the lift basket and not installation. Everywhere else we had searched online only had lifts that didn't actually utilize the attic space, but just lifted things off the ground to get it out of the way. Our main goal with this invention was to take advantage of the entirety of the space right above us for a reasonable price. Our first job was imagining what exactly the design of this thing would look like and what would be the best size to fit in most spaces, because a lot of homes don't actually have too large of attic spaces. The conclusion we came up with was to make the length customizable so that it could accommodate to our customers on an individual basis. Despite that, however, we would have to start at anywhere between 16 to 24 inches because our research told us that that was the standard spacing between most ceiling joists in modern homes. That is, if they're also up to code, depending on the state itself. When it came to caveats, we couldn't help but ignore that this product would likely require hiring some people to come by and frame the ceiling such that it could be installed improperly, or properly, not improperly. As well as just like the net profit of a singular purchase plus the installation, it kind of goes down a little bit. Um, that's where our idea came in for the 16 to 24 inches wide on our product so that like when we would be able to slide it so that like between the ceiling joist um, and we could use it for support without damaging the structure of the house. We kept the installation relatively simple, so all a user would need to do would be to cut out a rectangle in between the ceiling joist, push the product up in between the joist, then attach the unit to the joist. This doesn't account for the insulation that would be in the way and would need to be removed as well. As previously mentioned, there undeniably will be nuance in what size lengths people need depending on what their personal circumstances are. And even if we are doing our best to accommodate, we also just like this one size fits all standard that we're hoping will help most people, even if like it could be customized. Um, if someone wanted to store a couple of boxes, a long length would not be needed. However, if someone wanted to store poles, tiki torches, a kayak, or like anything that just runs on the longer end, the drop down shelf would need to be longer. So it's the same design, but more length essentially. Part of the design itself would incorporate square metal or aluminum tubing to create a good middle ground of both being lightweight and sturdy. The shelf's frame would be held together by bolts rated from medium to high weight, which we decided on instead of opting in welding in order to like keep our product modular for customers. Modular in this case is referring to like being able to be easily adjusted in the scenario in which our customer wants to move things around or add additional components from like, their storage. For example, like if a buyer wanted to store boxes one year and a kayak next year, then it would be really easy to unbolt a shelf to make room. Another element that would be modular is the bottom of the shelf, where most of the longer items like kayaks and poles would be. Our goal for it would be to have holes kind of like a pegboard in a garage, but on the bottom, like more with like thin carpet to avoid damaging anything that's stored there. With that design, it would make it so that like the carpeted wood or any other form of support with dowels could slide in those holes in order to keep things from tipping over. Part of what makes working with a modular product so great is that by design it like increases the ease of access and accessibility by like leaps and bounds. An example of that would be like something like if you were attempting to store like a 16 by 5 by 13.5 rectangle box. Along the four square tubing pipes at each end, they would go up and down. And with those holes there, like there are holes in them in which shelves can be placed at any height someone might need, or even remove the product itself if the situation called for it. Something we floated around was using powder coated paint. This is because it has a certain degree of strength and durability to it, with the only downside being that it could potentially increase the price point to becoming unappealing to a typical consumer. A suggestion that I considered after like being confronted with this fact was using enamel paints as like a cheaper but still effective alternative. The whole shelf's underside will have a layer of insulation such that the product doesn't hurt the insulation that's already within the house. Covering said insulation would be a layer of 5 by 8 thick drywall with a thin rubber skirt. This makes it so that when the shelf is raised in the store position, the drywall remains flush with the rest of the ceiling, and the rubber skirt itself is removable, which makes painting one's walls and interchanging the parts much easier. What isn't immediately visible, but still significant nonetheless, is the enclosed box within a door on like one of the two sides to access the pulley motor. We decided on a closed box design as opposed to like an open tray, primarily because attics, despite their space, are just like festering nests of spiders, bugs, and all the like. The detriment to this is that the production costs and there's a price increase. But it is more than favorable when it comes to like preventing consumers' items from getting lambasted by like dust and cobwebs. Like overall, it is worth it. By incorporating the pulley motor that raises and lowers the entirety of the shelf, we're able to just also like protect anything from getting caught in it during operation. So like in a scenario where like someone needs to access it, um, fortunately, so that the side of our box, like our box allows for that. Um, we were also able to minimize the cost with the box by using plywood, considering it's like cheap, lightweight, and rugged. Rubber or plastic was considered as a potential option, but ultimately we tossed that aside in favor of wood as it's just more reliable. The reason we were able to get away with compromising the quality of the box to begin with was just that like it isn't even seen. Its sole purpose is to keep attic dust and bugs off of its users' belongings. Moreover, on the pulley motor, the frame within the box that like holds everything, it would also be made of like the square tubing, considering that that's what will be supporting the weight of the shelf itself. The components that allow for the shelf to slide up and down, aside from the pulley itself, is the simple thick plastic stripes that act as the guide rails in order to prevent the shelf from swaying. The pulley needs to be rated to lift at least 450 pounds, which in most cases consumers will be very unlikely to need more within the context of our current dimensions allocated. I determined that the pulley motor with that rating would only cost around like $110, which for our purposes is great because it's both safe and cost effective. The basket that would be attached to said pulley motor would be attached via metal cables. on all four sides in order to like give stability when raising or lowering it. If the pulley motor were to fail, bump stops were embedded into like the end of the guide rails in order to prevent the shelf from crash landing onto the floor. As well as just like the fact that it makes the movement upon full extension, it's a lot more subtle and less harsh. It looks nicer, more graceful. There's a wireless remote that can be attached by the light switch or any convenient nearby spot intended for the pulley motor. As for the method of keeping the pulley's operation safe, the bump stops will also include a secondary motor controller mounted at the top of the inside of the box to prevent being trapped if someone were to ride the shelf to the storage position. Another idea we naturally arrived at was adding like IR or infrared sensors, like the ones kind of used on garage doors to shut off the motor if something were to put their hand in between while it moves up to the storage positions. And then also like a single three-prong power cable would be used to power the whole system, as well as a battery for the remote, obviously. If the power were to shut off unintentionally and a user needed to lower their belongings, they could accomplish this manually via the access doors on the box. All in all, the cost of this could be quite low when constructed with the sizes that we determined. Our product could really assist people like myself who are severely lacking in space to put things, but not even just that, even people who are simply just they feel like their space has become too cluttered and they need to offload things in a convenient and easy to access location. Essentially, I'm saying that this is both for additional storage purposes as well as convenience purposes. We approached this project by considering the cost, parts, and practicality. I figured out what parts would be best to utilize in relation to being cost effective without compromising the functionality and reliability of the parts themselves. Trevor determined the ways in which like the idea worked uh, within the context of a real house, and everything that would need to be considered for functionality and practicality within the setting. We're both very happy with just how much we were able to consider within the scope of our current living situations and just the satisfaction of being detail oriented on this in general. So yeah.